The dining room at Hargrove and Bell smelled like money. The specific kind that didn't need to announce itself. Black truffle risotto, aged burgundy, candle wax from tapers that cost more per box than most people spent on groceries. The crystal chandeliers overhead threw light that was engineered to make everyone look slightly more beautiful than they actually were, which was the whole point of a place like this. Laurel Voss had worked the main floor for 11 months, and she had learned early that the light lied. She was 28, though most guests, if they bothered to notice her at all, assumed she was younger. Something about the way she moved, deliberate and quiet, as though she were trying to take up as little space as possible. Her dark hair was pulled back according to the restaurant's dress code, not a strand loose, and her uniform was pressed the way her mother had taught her to press things, which meant perfectly. She carried a tray the way someone carries something they've carried 10,000 times. Without thinking about it, Table 9 was finishing their amuse-bouche. Table 12 needed a wine refill. Table 4, a party of 11 that had booked the private alcove 3 weeks in advance, was the reason the entire floor staff had been briefed twice before service began. Prescott Langham's party. The name moved through the restaurant industry the way certain names do. Not because anyone particularly liked the man, but because he was the kind of guest who could make or break a venue's reputation with a single review, a single phone call, a single mention at the right dinner table. He was 61, the founder of Langham Capital, a firm that had made him the kind of wealth that stopped being countable at some point and simply became a condition of existence. He had been written about in Forbes 4 times. He collected those profiles the way he collected everything, without sentiment, only accumulation. Laurel had been assigned Table 4's alcove for the night because her floor manager, a meticulous Haitian-American man named Bernard, trusted her more than he trusted anyone else on the floor. He had told her this plainly, without flattery, the way Bernard did everything. "You don't rattle," he'd said. "That's the whole job tonight." She had nodded and gone back to polishing glassware. What Bernard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Laurel had once sat in a lecture hall at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, not as a visitor, but as a student. A full merit scholarship student, one of 9 admitted in her year to the piano performance program. She had been 20 when she arrived, carrying a keyboard she'd saved for over 3 years and a duffel bag of clothes that needed washing. She had been 21 when she left. Her mother's diagnosis had come in October of her 2nd year. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 3. Her mother had no insurance worth speaking of. Her father had been out of the picture since Laurel was 12. There was no one else. She had taken a leave of absence that semester, fully intending to return in the spring, and the spring had turned into the following fall, and the following fall had turned into a year, and then into the particular kind of permanent that doesn't announce itself until it's already happened. She didn't talk about any of this at work. There was no reason to. She was good at her job, and she kept her eyes open, and she sent her mother money every 2 weeks without fail, and that was the shape of her life, and it was enough. Some days it was enough. Prescott Langham arrived at 7:14, 14 minutes late, with 9 people trailing him like planets in orbit. The men wore suits in shades of charcoal and midnight blue. The women wore things that had been chosen to look effortless, which meant they had cost a great deal of effort. Everyone was attractive in the specific way that came from never having been seriously cold or seriously hungry. Langham himself was broad-shouldered and silver-haired, the kind of man who had been handsome once and now settled for impressive. He walked into the alcove without looking at the room first, which Laurel had noticed was something powerful people did They assumed the room had already arranged itself for them. She stepped forward. "Good evening. Welcome to Hargrove and Bell. My name is Laurel. I'll be taking care of your table tonight." Langham didn't look at her. He was already pulling out his phone, already scanning something on its screen. "We'll start with 2 bottles of the Montrachet," he said. "The 17, not the 19, of course. And tell your sommelier I don't want the theatrical ritual tonight. Just pour the wine. I'll let him know." She poured water and distributed the menus and retreated without being dismissed, which was the skill the job actually required. She had learned to make herself present and invisible simultaneously, to exist in the peripheral vision of people who didn't want to think about how their food arrived. The dinner moved forward the way expensive dinners do, with a specific, unhurried luxury. Course after course, the kitchen executed everything with precision. Laurel managed the table's needs the way she managed most things, with a tension that looked like absence. It was during the 3rd course that she noticed the piano. It had been there all along, of course. A Steinway Model B tucked into the far corner of the alcove, a decorative touch that the restaurant rarely used for anything but ambiance during private events. Someone had left its fallboard propped open. The keys caught the light and held it. She noticed Langham notice it too. He leaned back in his chair, wineglass held loosely in his right hand, and looked at the piano the way he probably looked at most things he was considering acquiring, appraisingly, as if everything in the world were, at some level, available. "Does anyone actually play that thing?" he asked the table generally. A man to his left, younger, eager in the way that suggested he was still angling for something from Langham, laughed a little too quickly. Probably just decoration. Shame. Langham set down his glass. "I played competitively, you know. Junior division. All-State, New York, 1979. He said it the way he said most things about himself, as established fact rather than conversation. "That's impressive," a woman across the table offered. "I could still play circles around most people in this room." He glanced around with an expression that fell just short of a smile. Then his gaze moved, as it had several times throughout the evening, across the room. Looking for an audience, looking for something. It landed on Laurel. She was standing 3 feet from the alcove entrance, her tray at her side, waiting for the right moment to clear the appetizer plates from the far end. She had been still for perhaps 15 seconds, that was all it took. "You?" Langham said it the way people say a word they're certain will produce results. "Waitress." She crossed the 3 feet. "Yes, sir. Do you play?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm sorry." "The piano." He nodded toward it. "Do you play? Any of you people play? You people landed in the room and just sat there." "I play a little," said the eager man to his left, trying to rescue the conversation's shape. Langham waved a hand. "Scales don't count." He was still looking at Laurel. Something in her stillness had caught him, the way stillness sometimes does when a person in power is used to producing reactions. "What about you?" "I'm here to take care of the table," she said. "That's not what I asked." The other guests had gone quiet. It was the specific quiet that falls when someone with authority decides to make a moment out of something, and everyone else decides they'd rather watch than intervene. Laurel held her tray. The tray had 6 empty water glasses on it. She was aware of each one. "I've played," she said finally. "A little." Langham's mouth moved into the smile he'd been holding back. "A little, all right." He set his napkin on the table. "Then play something. Consider it part of the service." There was soft laughter from the table, uncomfortable but complicit. "Mr. Langham," she said, and she kept her voice the same way she kept her face, which was level. "I don't think that would be appropriate. Why not? The piano's right there. You said you played. I said I've played. Same thing." It wasn't the same thing, and they both knew it, and the rest of the table knew it, and the knowing hung in the air. He was enjoying this. That was the part that clarified everything for her. Not the request, not even the condescension, but the enjoyment. He had found a small corner of power, and he was pressing into it because he could, because the evening had been pleasant but uneventful, and this was more interesting, and because she was not the kind of person who could push back. Or so the calculation went. She set the tray down on the service credenza behind her. She heard Bernard inhale sharply from the doorway. She didn't look at him. "What would you like to hear?" she asked. The table stirred. Langham blinked, a quick recalibration, then recovered his amusement. "Surprise me. Something classical. Let's see what a little means." She walked to the Steinway. The bench was at the wrong height. She adjusted it with 2 hands, efficiently, and sat down. The piano had been tuned. She could tell that much before she touched a key, just from the environment, from the humidity in the room, from something she'd long since stopped being able to explain rationally. She rested her hands in her lap for one breath, not performing stillness, just still. Then she began. She played the opening of the Brahms intermezzo in A major. 118, no, 2. Not because it was showy, but because it was the piece she had been working on the week. She left Curtis, the last thing she'd practiced before the phone call from Philadelphia Presbyterian, before she'd gone home and never quite come back. She knew it the way you know a language you grew up speaking, not as performance but as fact. The room went quiet, not the managed quiet of a formal concert, not the polite quiet of background music. The deeper quiet that occurs when a room full of people realizes simultaneously that they have misunderstood the situation they are in. Laurel played without looking at the keys. Her back was straight, and her hands moved with the particular economy of someone who had spent years being told not to waste motion. The melody moved through the alcove and out into the main dining room, and somewhere behind her she was peripherally aware that other conversations had paused, that someone at a table nearby had set down a fork. She played the full piece. 4 minutes, give or take. She did not rush it, and she did not perform it. She simply played it the way it existed in her, which was completely. When she lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment where no one did anything. Then the woman across from Langham began to applaud. And she was not the only one. Laurel stood, smoothed her apron, and picked up her tray. Prescott Langham was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face all evening, which was uncertainty, not the theatrical uncertainty of a man pretending to be surprised. The real kind, the kind that moves behind the eyes. "Where did you?" He stopped. Started again. "That wasn't a little." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. Where did you study?" She retrieved a water glass from the credenza and moved back toward the far end of the table because the Chenin Blanc at seat 7 needed refilling, and the job was still the job. "I studied in Philadelphia," she said. "A while ago. Philadelphia." He was watching her in a way he hadn't all evening, as though he were recalculating something. "Curtis?" She didn't answer immediately. She poured the wine, confirmed the level, returned the bottle to its sleeve. "For a time," she said. The eager man to his left had been quiet since she'd started playing. He was still quiet now, and he looked smaller than he had before, which was interesting because nothing about him had physically changed. "What stopped you?" Langham asked. The social performance had dropped out of his voice. There was something almost direct in it now, which surprised her. "Life," she said, which was the answer she'd given so many times it had become the shape of a truth rather than the truth itself but it was all she was going to offer to a table full of strangers. He nodded slowly. Then he looked at the piano, and then back at her, and then he picked up his wine glass and turned away, and the dinner resumed, and the moment closed. Or so she thought, The party stayed late, nearly 2 hours past their reservation end. Langham ordered a dessert round, and then an additional bottle, and the conversation at the table shifted, became less performance, more actual. He told a story about his own father, a mechanic from Queens, who had wanted him to become a doctor. The table laughed at the right moments. He was, she noted, capable of warmth when he wasn't performing. Most people were. At 10:40, the party began to gather their things. Laurel was calculating the tip percentages of her other tables, doing the mental arithmetic she always did at the end of a shift, when Langham approached the service credenza. He set down his credit card folder, signed it, slid it back. Then he removed a card from his inner jacket pocket and held it out to her. She looked at it without taking it. "I'm on the board of the Aldrich Foundation," he said. "Among other things, we fund a continuing education program for," he paused, chosen his words differently than she expected, "for people who had to stop." She looked at the card. "Curtis has an adult re-enrollment track," he said, "for candidates who left in good standing. It's competitive, but I could make a call." He paused. "If you wanted." The alcove was nearly empty now. The last 2 members of his party were pulling on their coats near the entrance, speaking in low voices. Bernard was hovering with the refined anxiety of a man who had been anxious for the past 4 hours and was not yet ready to stop. Laurel took the card. She held it carefully, the way she held things in the had, and looked at the name printed on it, Prescott M. Langham. The embossing was deep. It was the kind of card that had been made to feel like a particular kind of gravity. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. Something in the nod was different from the rest of the evening, less polished, more human. "You shouldn't be waiting tables," he said, and then seemed to hear himself, and added, "I don't mean that the way it sounds." "I know," she said, and she did. She had spent long enough around people who said things badly to have learned to locate the actual meaning underneath. He was a man who had moved through the world, expecting it to yield to him, and something about this particular evening had surprised him, and he was doing what people do when that happens, trying, in the only language he reliably spoke, to account for it. She slipped the card into her apron pocket. The party left. The alcove was cleared and reset, and the lights were brought to half in the way they were at the end of every service night, and Laurel carried trays to the back and handed off linen and clocked out at 11:30, the same as always. Bernard stopped her near the coat rack. "What was that?" he asked. He was not angry. He was something else, the particular look of a man who had been proven right about something and wasn't quite sure how to arrange his face around it. "He asked me to play," she said. "I played." Bernard looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't know you could do that." "There are a lot of things you don't know about me," she said, which wasn't unkind. It was just true. She collected her bag from the locker in the break room. The card was still in her apron pocket, and she transferred it to her wallet between her library card and her transit card, where small important things lived. Outside, the street was the particular November cold that comes before the real cold, the warning cold, and the city moved around her the way it always did. Indifferent, constant, beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful when they're not trying to be. She thought about the last time she'd sat at a piano in a room that expected something of her. The master class in her 2nd semester. Professor Elisa Holt, exacting, brilliant, ruthless about sentiment, standing behind her and saying, "Stop playing at the music and play the music." She had been 20 years old and furious, and she had gone home that night and practiced until her hands ached and come back the next morning and played it better, and Holt had said nothing, which was the highest grade she gave. She had been good. She had known she was good with the specific terror of someone who knows what failure would cost. Not arrogance. accountability. She walked 3 blocks and took the train. In her apartment, which was a 1-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades, she heated water for tea and sat at her kitchen table with the card in front of her. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't turn on the television. She sat in the kitchen quiet that she had learned to value, the particular quiet of a life that belonged to her, whatever shape it was in. She thought about her mother. Her mother was in remission now, had been for 18 months, was working part-time at a pharmacy counter and going to a book club on Thursday evenings, and had recently taken up, of all things, watercolor painting. The crisis had passed. The reason Laurel had left had been solved, insofar as it could be solved, and what remained was not the crisis but its aftermath, which was a different kind of permanent. She thought about the Brahms, how it had come back to her hands without her asking it to, how her body had remembered something her mind had spent years filing under before. The card had a phone number and an email. The email was a direct address, not an assistance. That was either a gesture of sincerity or a detail he hadn't thought about. She had no way of knowing which. She put the card back in her wallet. She finished her tea. She thought about what the professor had said once, not to her specifically, but to the seminar room generally, in the way that the best teachers say things. Knowing some of it will land somewhere useful, without being able to predict where. The instrument doesn't forget what you've given it, Holt had said. The question is whether you're willing to give it again. Outside, a siren passed and faded. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the building above her, someone was walking from room to room. She opened her laptop. She searched. Curtis Institute Continuing Education, returning students. The page loaded slowly, and then it loaded. She read for a long time, without moving. Then she reached into her wallet, took out the card, and set it next to the keyboard. She didn't make any decisions that night. She made tea, and she read, and she sat with it. The way she had learned to sit with things since she was 21 and had discovered that the world did not particularly wait for you to be ready. That was all, but the fallboard on the Steinway had been open, and she had played, and the room had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something real happens. Inside them, that was enough for tonight. That was more than enough.